course and said, this is what we're going to do. All right, we are live.
Or labor deliveries. They don't have to be delivery.
Okay. I tried to find something that I don't know where it's at, but anyway, on some of you were not here. I think there was just 2 of us here last week.
Yeah, I was celebrating my birthday. So,
And on page 154, I want to deal with this. And you got to understand when the, I need to go up there to deal with that too. On page 153, let's go back to page 153.
okay.
The language changes. All right, under that one, the third paragraph, during these years of biblical science, another language became prominent. The Greek language was official tongue of both Syrian and Egyptian empires. Every educated person was able to read, write, and speak Greek fluently. Now, this is Koine Greek, okay? And that's what your New Testament is written in, is Koine Greek. And the reason that's important, that is a dead language, okay? Dead language means that it's not changing. English language is not a dead language. It changes. The Koine Greek is a dead language, so if we write a dictionary today, 10 years from now, it's going to be the same. Where in English, if you write a dictionary today, 10 years, it's going to be out of date. Okay. And you can use words like bread. There's, when I was growing up, that meant money. Cool, bad, we have different definitions for those things. So, but this Koine Greek, and you got to make sure that you mention the Koine Greek, starts with a K. K-O-N-I-E, I think is somewhere. But that was the language, and that's what your New Testament is written in, okay? And that is your alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, those things there, okay? That was important. These things are becoming prominent during the time between the Bible, the 400 years between Malachi and Matthew. All right. Then on the next page, we find 154. We find there's religious changes, and here is the background, and you'll see this on page 155. But when you see the religious changes, what's taking place now, you see some of that in the book of Nehemiah. You'll find the background, the very basic then of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Herodians, and this type of things, the Zealots, the Essenes, and these are the sects then, not sex, but sects, different groups of the Jewish religion, okay? And he talks about that on page 155 especially. He talks about the attitudes towards mercy up at the beginning of the page. Attitudes such as mercy, justice, and honesty are hard to measure. On the other hand, it's easy to know whether a child had been circumcised. And that's when the Pharisees started to saying it. They really said, you got to keep the law. 8th day, doesn't matter when that 8th day is, child's 8th day, don't need to circumcise. And Jesus had some things to say about that. So we do not have a record of the origin of any specific sects. We know that there were early groups called and he called some these names here, but in that paragraph down, it's a 1, 2, 3, 4th line, it says the Pharisees were ordinarily middle-class Jews who were strongly resisted the Greek influence. The name is thought to mean the separate ones. No one knows its origins, but you can see them developing these attitudes that they have beginning in Nehemiah's day, and then that developed during, and you could get into the Maccabees. We kind of skipped over the Maccabees, that type of thing. You know, there are some books, if you get the Apocryphal books, you ever heard of the Apocryphal books? There are doubtful books, that's what Apocrypha means. And there are like the Maccabean, some of that's history and some of it's pretty close to being true, but some of it they can tell us enough is not true, so therefore it's not added into our Bibles today. And so the Maccabeans, that's what I was talking about. The Maccabeans, their history, and some of that, how it correlates. I mean, it'd be good to read outside the Bible, but it would help us to understand what's going on in between the Testaments. The desecration of the temple, the bringing in of pigs and offering pigs on the altar, which was be sacrilege to the nth degree, because pig is an unclean animal. Then on the next paragraph, you have in contrast with the Pharisees, the sect rose the Sadducees, and you know why they're Sadducees. They don't believe in the resurrection, so they're Sadducees. Okay.
That's a good way to remember it.
All right. And usually this was the high priest was from this group. During Jesus's day, the high priest would be a Sadducee. And then we have other groups, the Essenes. They objected to the Pharisees also. They moved in the opposite direction of the Sadducees. The Sadducees considered the Pharisees too strict. The Essenes considered them dangerously liberal. Okay. And then we find the Zealots. And they thought that the Jewish state should be established at all costs. Now, these were the people that were strictly a physical kingdom. And that's what they were looking for. The Messiah would be a physical king.
They were very violent.
Yes. So that's some of the stuff that we need to have in our minds as we're going through then. The time draws near. Let's notice on page 160. And I mentioned, I think I did. Did we not read Daniel chapter 2 one time? Okay. All right. We had 4 world powers. And he mentions these 4 world powers. Okay. Nebuchadnezzar's dream, I don't know, this 1, 2, 3, 4 line down, something like that. How many empires does it that makes sense? Nebuchadnezzar's dream, let us count them. We have 1 was Babylon, 2 is Medo-Persian. Now, Medo-Persian then began in Daniel chapter 5. All right, Daniel chapter 5. You remember the handwriting on the wall?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the handwriting on the wall. Then that night they were tried in the balances and found wanting, and they were overthrown by Darius, I believe is his name. And so that began then. That was the end of the 70 years of captivity, really, for the children of Israel.
The Medo-Persians, is that 2 groups?
They were kind of,
Blended group.
yeah, I'll call it more of a blended type situation.
Was it the Medes? Is that why it's called Medo-Persian?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Together.
Then you have Greece, that's Alexander the Great.
Yeah.
Okay, then you have Rome after that. You're going to have Rome. And that was who was in style when Christ was born and when he was crucified. All right, if you'll look on page 162. This is the Roman Empire during the days of Christ. And because Rome ruled, there was travel was not restricted. Okay, you had a law that was accepted everywhere. You had roads that were easily traveled, and you had a language that made it easy to go anywhere in the world, the known world at that time, to preach the gospel. And these are contributing factors in Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4. In the fullness of time, God sent forth his son. The time was right. And that made the time right then because of all of these things. Okay. Now I want to start on page 167. We're going to talk about Herod's family because there are so much of this family that is involved in the New Testament. Okay, so we've gone from the Old Testament to New Testament now. So we're going to notice these couple of chapters pretty closely here. Wise men came from the east. That's right. Matthew chapter 2 and verse 1. If they came from the east, then where do you think they came from? Yes, that's correct. If you go back to Daniel, in the book of Daniel, really in Daniel chapter 2, he called for the wise men and those type of men, the sorcerers, the astrologers, and those men. So here would be some of those magi then that we notice in Matthew chapter 2. Same group, okay? And they could have known then about the star. There was Daniel. Okay, they could have known that, and that could have been taught to them so that they knew that when that star was going to appear. We don't, maybe speculating there, I know, but it could have been that Daniel taught them about what would take place. All right, so these men then came from the east to worship the child born to the King of the Jews, to be the King of the Jews. He was stopped in Jerusalem, and I think they stopped in Jerusalem. And let me go back, since we're starting in Matthew chapter 2. In Matthew chapter 1, the genealogies of Jesus Christ, nobody ever questioned. In the New Testament time, nobody ever questioned that he was from the seed of David or the seed of Abraham. That's because it could be proven at that time what his lineage was. And that's the importance of Matthew chapter 1 and then also Luke chapter 3, I believe it is. So those things, they went to the temple, they could pull up the lineage. And that's important, even the book of Nehemiah. Some of them could not serve as priests because they could not trace their lineage back. And that is the beginning of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and this type of thing there. All right, so they stopped at Jerusalem. That's your next blank. To see where the child was to be born, and they were able to tell him it would be in Bethlehem in Judea. Okay, I think if you go to Micah chapter 5 and verse 2, it uses a little different terminology there, but it's still Bethlehem of Judea. Now we need to find where Bethlehem of Judea is on our maps, page 172.
Right below, south of Jerusalem,
Okay,
right above the word Judea on this map.
that's right. That is Bethlehem. I always thought it was.
City of David.
I always thought it was north, but nope, it is south of Jerusalem. Okay.
North of Hebron.
Yes. Okay. Let me cut that.
Now, where does Nazareth come into play?
All right, Nazareth is all right on the same map. We need to know where that is.
Galilee.
Galilee. See the Sea of Galilee. Now go west, right at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee. Okay.
Right above the word plain of S.
Okay, so they had to travel from Nazareth all the way to Bethlehem?
Wow, that's a long.
That's about 80 miles.
Being pregnant?
On a donkey.
On a donkey. Golly.
Very pregnant. All right, now you figure if you could travel,
She could do it.
if you've traveled 20 miles a day,
Oh, golly.
so that's 4 days.
Of course, she'd never lost
Okay. And now when you mention Nazareth, that's going to be up in that area. And then in one of our earlier classes, we mentioned around the Sea of Galilee. That's where Jesus spent a lot of time. Okay, up in there. We'll come to that on page 172 and notice some of the cities that I want you to, that are important during New Testament times from that map there. but let's go back to 167. Okay. Now I want to deal with this too. Herod sent the men on their way with his pretended blessing. That's talking about, this is Matthew chapter 2 then. Sent them out saying, if when you find him, you come back and tell me, and I want to go and worship him. The angels warned the wise men to go home a different way because Herod intended to harm the child. Herod was furious when he realized that they were not returning, and he ordered all the babies of
The Jews.
the Bethlehem slain up to 2 years of age. Why 2 years of age?
That was about the age that Jesus was.
Yes, a lot of times during the Christmas holidays, we'll have the wise men and all of this coming there all on the same time. Doesn't necessarily. Let me tell you why. One reason why. Because when Mary went to offer the sacrifices for having a male child, what did she offer? Anybody remember? Two turtle doves. Okay, what does that signify?
They were poor.
Okay, now, if the wise men would have come before then, what would they have offered?
Whatever.
And a turtle.
Okay, because what did the wise men bring? Gold,
frankincense,
Frankincense, and myrrh. And these were expensive gifts. And it probably she would have bought and paid for a sacrifice with that money. Okay, so they were poor people. And so the correlation there, that time, could have been up to 2 years. And that's why he kills these 2 years before the time he was, from the time he was killed. I mean, born until this was taking place. So sometimes we get an idea in our mind taught to us by the religious world that's not necessarily so. Okay, we need to understand it. All right, the next paragraph starts, this well-known story about Herod the Great fits with all the other historical facts known about him. He was probably in his last sickness when the wise men came to him. There was no way a baby born anywhere could have touched Herod's kingdom because he had very little left. Herod had become obsessed with the determination to establish his dynasty. The story of his life is strewn with the ghost of people whom he suspected of treason and disloyalty. So he was a very cruel man. These and the others were not the best of people. So we're looking at a Christianity comes into the world in a very hostile towards Christianity world. Understand that Nero burnt Christians to light up his garden. Okay, we're talking 100 years from this time. Okay. Then a couple of paragraphs down from that, the Jews hated Herod. You see that time there? Just wanted you to know that he would have a difficult time winning their favor, even if he had been a benevolent ruler. He was not a Jew, but was rather an Idumean. That's going to, he was, now let's look down here on page 172 and find Idumea. Down at the south. Okay. Dead Sea. Go east. No, go west from the Dead Sea. You see Idumea? Down at the bottom.
It's kind of red.
Oh, I see. I was looking for a town, but it's an area.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. He probably had some Edomite background in him too. But he had a little Jewish in him, but he had some other blood in him too. No, he was not. He was not that. No, Muslim had not been.
I'm just kidding.
I know, but they had not been established yet.
They were in the 500s. When
Yes, that's right.
So they were even, that was established for the Catholic Church then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Catholic Church was established.
All right. Now, so the Roman officials neither knew nor cared about the ancient rivalries within the land. Herod professed he observed the law of Moses, while his whole life was a mockery to all that it taught. Its cruelty and justice made already a difficult situation an unbearable one for the Jews. Let's go down to the Jews were granted complete religious liberty. The high priest was recognized as the religious head of all the Jews wherein they were living. So that is why we see when Jesus was crucified, there were 3 Jewish trials and 3 Roman trials, all of them illegal, by the way. But the Jewish trials were illegal because of the time of the day. They were done at night and should have never been done at night. But the reason they got to carry him that far to the Jewish council was because the Jews had this religious liberty. They could not carry out the death penalty, so they had to go to the Romans, and that's how they got the death penalty. All right, so he was recognized. They were allowed to pay the temple tax. The law of Moses required, although Rome usually did not allow any tax except her own, but they did for the Jews. The Jews were allowed to observe the Sabbath day no matter where they were living, even if the Jew was a Roman soldier. Antipater was convinced the Romans this was the only way to prevent Maccabean type rebellion all over the empire. Furthermore, the internal affairs of the country were practically controlled by the Jews themselves. The highest tribunal court, called the Sanhedrin, was allowed to continue. Some people call that Sanhedrin, but I've always Sanhedrin, made up of 70 men. Okay, and it had its background in the book of Exodus, when Moses then was told to choose 70 men from the elders. Okay, and that's where it came from. Well, that's what it says. This court was made up of 70 men of the Jewish aristocracy and was presided over by the high priest. It came to be into being during the time of the years of the Greek domination. Many cities were rebuilt or beautified by Herod. One of the most important ones was on the coastline about 20 miles south of Mount Carmel at the site of Stratos Tower. It had been built for years. The new city was built around an artificial harbor and named Caesarea. This is not Matthew 16. Okay, I'll get to that in just a minute. In honor of Augustus Caesar, the city plus the other seaport cities that have been enlarged and improved through the years gave the Jews ready access to sea trade. Now, if you'll go back over to the page 172, that map on 172. All right, if you go north of the Sea of Galilee, past the Lake Huron, and you'll come up through there and you'll see Caesarea Philippi. Everybody see that? That's Matthew chapter 16. When Jesus would come to the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Whom do men say I, the Son of Man, am?" Some say that thou art John the Baptist, others that Elias, some Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. But whom say ye that I am? And Simon Peter answered and said, Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Okay, so then that conversation took place right there. Okay, and I know the King James says in the coast of Caesarea Philippi. So the coast means in an area. It does not mean that it was a coastal city. It just means that it was in an area.
Could have been on the coast of that river.
No. Okay, it's kind of like the desert. Okay, in the New Testament, when you see the word desert, that doesn't mean what you think of a desert.
Desolate.
Yes, it means more of a desolate place.
Oh, just a desolate.
That's right, because when Jesus fed
The 5,000.
I think it is, they were in a desert place, but there were green grass. So it was just a deserted, uninhabited place.
Oh,
Okay. So now really what we need to get to is Jerusalem itself was renovated. The wall Pompey had torn down was rebuilt. The fortress near the temple was rebuilt and renamed Antonia. Herod built a combination palace and fort for himself, which he called the Upper Palace. In about 19 BC, he started rebuilding the temple. It took 84 years to complete that rascal, okay? And the grand structure that Herod planned. The resulting temple was far more beautiful than the rebuilding of Zerubbabel was able to build in the days of the return of the captivity. Now, in my Ezekiel class, we're dealing with some of this, but you took that remnant that came back home and they rebuilt the temple. They did the best they could with what they had, but they had God's guidance on that. And so, but it was nowhere close to the one that Solomon built. Okay.
But that's during Zerubbabel, is that what that
Yeah.
is, the rebuilding
Of
of
the
the
temple,
temple?
that's right. Now you notice, and I asked you to look at this kind of on page 168, the Herodian family. Okay. And Herod the Great was who was the ruler when Jesus was born. And then we're going to find Herod Philip and all these, Herod II, Agrippa, and all of these folks we're going to find in our New Testament. So here is a connection with this, with Herod the Great. He was the, the one who started it all, so to speak. All right, underneath that it says Herod the Great ruled over near all of Palestine. And then he will divide the land into three parts. Archelaus, the son, was given Judah and Samaria. Antipater was given Galilee and Perea. And the third son, Philip, was given a non-Jewish portion northeast of the Sea of Galilee. Rome let the wheel stand, except Archelaus. He was given a title of Etherarch, rather than a king as his father had intended. Archelaus proved to be nearly as cruel a tyrant as his father, Matthew chapter 2, verses 19 through 21. The Jews protested. He was finally disposed about 10 years after Herod's death. The southern portion of the land was annexed by Rome and made into a Roman province of Judah in 6 AD. It was thereafter governed by a series of procurators, and you'll hear this in your New Testament. And this is how this came about. The Jews were unhappy over Roman control and were constantly looking for new ways to revolt. Pontius Pilate was the fifth procurator to serve Judea, making a total of 7 rulers in Judea in 33 years. Herod the Great, Archelaus, and 5 procurators. It was a period of time of unrest. Philip the Tetrarch. If I remember correctly, the Tetrarch means a ruler of the fourth part. So this land should have been divided 4 ways. The only time that he's mentioned is in Luke 3 and verse 1, when the writer is naming various rulers to identify the exact time John the Baptist began his work. All right, now notice the next paragraph. Reference is made to another Philip in Matthew chapter 14, verses 1 through 12. This is when John the Baptist is in prison, and he's going to tell one of them that can't be married to that woman, and he loses his head over it. Okay. He too was the son of Herod the Great, called Herod Philip. Instead of being given a portion of his father's kingdom, this Philip had been disinherited because of a hint of disloyalty. He was living in Rome with his wife Herodias, who was also his niece, okay, the daughter of Salome. Herod Antipater visited them in Rome and took Herodias away with him. All right. I wondered about that. John the Baptist rebuked Antipater for taking her, and Herodias insisted he be beheaded when the daughter danced in front of them. Okay. And then Jesus grew up in Galilee under the rule of Herod Antipater. These were years of relative peace in Galilee because Antipater was not as cruel as his father or brother. Antipater was in Jerusalem the day of Jesus' trial, and Pilate sent Jesus to him when he learned Jesus was from Galilee. Okay, some years after Christ returned to heaven, the Roman Emperor Caligula made Herod Agrippa I ruler over most of the territory his grandfather had control. Agrippa was the son of one of the sons of Herod the Great, and had killed, let's see, Herod had killed, and his brother Herodias. This Herod prosecuted the early church to win favor of the Jews. He killed the apostle James. This is Acts 12. And imprisoned Peter, intending to kill him. That's when the angels came and let Peter go.
I've always heard that Caligula decorated, I guess you would call it, the road to Rome by
Well,
crucifying over 3,000 Christians on crosses and it lined the road to Rome.
very well could be. That was, like I said, a great time of persecution against the church. And so if you really weren't committed, then you wasn't going to become a Christian. Understand something about that too, because the way the Christian responded to that persecution, the church went spread throughout. Okay, and the way we live makes a big difference. Okay.
Caligula makes Nero look like a pussycat.
Yeah, they were all pretty tough. All right. Let's see. Josephus collaborates the fact by saying that he was seized by severe pains during the celebration at Caesarea. Oh, that's when he died. Yeah. No, Herod died.
Herod.
Acts chapter 12. Because the people said he was a god, and he didn't denounce that. So,
God sent him some pain.
yes. The land was divided upon Agrippa's death, and the portion including Judah, Samaria, Galilee, and Perea comprised the province of Judea. It was ruled by procurators with headquarters in Caesarea, and Agrippa II. And really, that that Caesarea right there is going to come when Paul is no earlier than that, when he is taken captive in Jerusalem, and they find out that he's going to be there's several Jews who are going to kill him, or not going to eat till they kill him. They take him to this Caesarea over here, not the Caesarea Philippi, but this Caesarea over here. Okay, so that's the importance of that. All right, let's see. This Agrippa II went to Caesarea to visit the proconsul Festus, and while he was there, he heard the case of the prisoner Paul, who had appealed his case to Caesar. It is no wonder Paul described him as being an expert in all customs and questions which are among the Jews, because Agrippa's family had known and outwardly observed the law of Moses for generations. So there is some of what's going on. Let's go ahead right now and look at map 170 on page 172. Let's start along we've already mentioned some of these places like Caesarea there on the coastline of the Mediterranean Sea, but drop down south a little bit and you find Joppa. You see Joppa? All right. Now let's keep on. We noticed Idumea. Okay. We noticed Judah. And then around Jerusalem, you see where the Mount of Olives is, and you see where Bethany is.
Yeah.
Do you remember anybody from Bethany?
Lazarus.
All right. All right. Now, understand how close this is. This is like 2.5 miles from Jerusalem, and it's all in that area. Mount of Olives, you're going to have the Garden of Gethsemane, all in this area. Okay. When Jesus then, before he's crucified, and those type of things. Really, John chapter 11, when Lazarus there is raised from the dead. 4 days he waited. Why 4 days?
4 days was when the Jewish people believed
Spirit left the body.
deacon position and all that was really want to start.
Yeah, but also what Judy said there too is because they thought that the spirit could come back after, or didn't
Until
really
3 days.
live. And so he waited those days. What the disciple says, that if you would have been here, he wouldn't have died. Okay, that's may have been true. But he says, if you believe then in the resurrection, you're going to see him resurrected. And he was.
Well, they came
And that was-
after him, like Jesus, they came after him like right away.
Yeah.
And then he kind of dilly-dallied, on purpose.
Right.
And it seemed like they were kind of like maybe a little agitated with him
Yep.
for doing that.
But that's why. All right, now
And then he had to call Lazarus by name.
let's continue straight up north. We find Samaria. Y'all see that? And we've talked about that over the course of this course. Samaria. All right, John chapter 4, Acts chapter 8. Then we find Nazareth. This is going to be in the area. Then Capernaum. Look at the north of the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum. You see that? That's going to be Jesus' headquarters. Woe unto you, Chorazin. There is that Chorazin then. Then over there, see the Phoenician. Okay. The Syro-Phoenician woman that comes to him and asks for her daughter to be healed.
Yeah.
That she's from there. There's Tyre and Sidon right up in that area. Tyre then is on the little bit north of that, and then Sidon is even a little bit further north of that. Now let's start on the other side of the Jordan. That Iturea, that's important, Caesarea Philippi, then that Trachonitis, all right, and then Decapolis and Perea, all coming down that side there, are going to be important. Now, understand the Jews during that day, you see around Galilee, and it's a different color, and then Samaria. The Jews, if you were a real good Jew at that time, you would then start south to go to Jerusalem. You would cross the Jordan River and then come down through Gilead and Perea, and then cross over somewhere Bethany beyond the Jordan and cross over and go to Jerusalem that way. You would not go through the area of Samaria. Okay, so when Jesus in John chapter 4 is in that area, that's a surprise on a lot of different areas. Not just because he's talking to a woman, he's talking to somebody, he's in Samaria, and those type of things. There's a lot of going on there. All right, so we need to, get that in your mind. So when you read some of this in your Bible, you'll know what's going on with those, okay? All right, now, page did we get through that? Yes, page 170. All right, this is the life of Christ. This is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay? It's in our New Testament. I don't know if you've ever had anything to deal with people who say that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is not in your Old Testament. It's in your New Testament. Or they say it's in your Old Testament, not in your New Testament.
Yeah.
New Testament doesn't start to Acts chapter 2. They're just as wrong can be. When was Matthew, Mark, Luke, John written? After Acts chapter 2. Okay. So, all right. I want to deal with this first paragraph. It's not surprising the wise men expected to find the new king of the Jews in the city of Jerusalem. It was a cultural and a religious center of the land. That did not happen until David became king. If you'll go back and you'll study Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers, you'll find that it says where the name of God is called. It doesn't give a city, because when Samuel was judging the children of Israel, his place was not there. It was in Ramah. And probably the tabernacle was in Ramah. Then when David became king, it was probably still in Ramah when his first 7 years, and that would have been in Ramah, and then Hebron. He was dealt in Hebron. And you remember when David brought the Ark of the Covenant into the city of Jerusalem, Uzzah then died because of that, because he touched the Ark. And he was a priest, but they weren't carrying it in the correct way. And they had to go back and find out how to carry it. All right, so At the attendance at Passover, Pentecost, and Atonement were required by law. That's Leviticus chapter 23. All right, I want to deal with Leviticus chapter 23 right here for a minute because the day of Pentecost. We'll probably deal with this some in Acts chapter 2, the beginning of the church. The day of Pentecost was always on the first day of the week. And that's Leviticus chapter 23, verses 15 and 16. Always. He's named 7 Sabbaths. 7 times 7 is what?
49.
All right, plus 1.
It says on the morrow after the 7th Sabbath.
All right, that's the 50. That's where the word Pentecost comes from. It's 50. And the morrow after the Sabbath is a first day of the week. And so in Acts chapter 2, when the day of Pentecost was fully come, there was one accord in one place, and suddenly there came a sound from heaven as a rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. There's Acts chapter 2, and that is then on the first day of the week. The church began on the first day of the week. Okay. In addition, the Jews kept the feast of Purim to commemorate their deliverance from the Persians in Esther's day, and that's Esther's 9, 20 through 28. You can read that. That became then one of their. All right, the next paragraph. The temple served as a rallying point for their religion, for all the Jewish customs. Rabbinical schools flourished all over the city. Wealthy, devout Jews sent their sons there to be educated. And I think that's important. That proves my point. Where was Paul brought up? Where was Paul educated? All right, that's both of you correct. That's the city of Jerusalem and Gamaliel. And if his age then is what they think it is, he would have been contemporary with Jesus. He would have been in the city of Jerusalem when Jesus was in the city of Jerusalem. And so he knew who Jesus was before Acts chapter 9. I think he had some way of knowing who he was. Okay. And I think that's important. Okay. Let's see. Jesus went to the feast days regularly as a loyal Jew should do. Some of his most profound lessons were taught in the temple grounds. Most of the time, however, he chose the lesser towns and villages where common people heard him gladly. Let me back up from there for a minute. Jesus was, 12 years old when he went up to the city of Jerusalem, and his parents left him.
Hey, that happened.
Not for that length of time.
Well,
Wouldn't they think he was with somebody else?
That didn't make any difference.
Why
His
not?
mom and daddy left him.
What
Let me ask you something. Do you know where your children are?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I know where my children are.
Sometimes you entrust your children to other people.
That's what
Hey,
happened.
Isn't that what the story was? But when they got home, then
And they each one-
That's what the Bible says. So he went back. They had to go back. They searched 3 days for this rascal.
Mm.
Then where did they find him? In the temple. What was he doing? He was
About
asking
his
questions.
father's business.
That's right. All right. Now, let's go on. Bethlehem, I said it was 2.5, but it's 5 miles south of Jerusalem. It was never a major city in Israelite history. I differ with that. Okay, that's where David was from. To me, that makes it a pretty important city. It's the city where Jesus would be born in because he is descendant of David. That's Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. Okay. But several well-known Bible characters called it home. I think that makes it important. Ruth, the Moabitess, lived in Bethlehem. And who is in the lineage of David? That's right. With her mother-in-law Naomi, David tended his father's sheep on its hillside, 1 Samuel chapter 16. Much earlier, Jacob buried his favorite wife, and I like that idea, a favorite wife, Rachel, thereafter she gave birth to Benjamin. Okay. Joseph carried the young child and his mother to Egypt, Matthew chapter 2 and verse 14, to escape the wrath of King Herod. All right. And Joseph returns, next paragraph down, I think it is, to the land where he had heard that Herod was dead, and he stopped in Judea, Matthew chapter 2 and verse 22, because of the cruel Archelaus had taken his father's place. therefore took his family back to Nazareth, his original home. This is the only claim to fame of Nazareth ever had. The city is not mentioned in the Old Testament, nor is the writing of the historian Josephus, nor in the Talmud. Nathanael was skeptical that any good thing could come out of Nazareth. John chapter 1 and verse 46. And what was he told? Come and see. That's a good point. All right. Sometimes we get to people asking us questions. You the folks that don't have any music.
Yeah.
Yep.
Come and see.
Mhm.
Okay. You don't have to give an elaborate answer. Sometimes just come and see. That's all you need to do. When Jesus was resurrected from the dead, come and see the place where he laid. That's more than enough. Okay. So that's, sometimes we get prejudiced about things. I think some people are prejudiced against the South and think that there's only a bunch of redneck people, from the South. And you'd be surprised
Oh, it's
how
different.
smart.
I thought I was going to come down here and hear a bunch of y'alls down here.
Well, you still gonna hear a bunch of y'alls.
I don't hear that much.
1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 10, Paul was a Southerner because he says y'all. All right. Nazareth was about 80 miles north of Jerusalem, the province of Galilee. Now, you asked the question earlier, so that's where that came from. Now, understand 80 miles. We can travel 80 miles in just a little bit. I think for us, it's 60 miles for us to come from where we live over here. Okay, some of you may be traveling. How far do you travel, Justin?
It's probably about 70, 75 miles.
Okay,
Wow.
that's one
We
way.
do about 68.
Yeah.
Yeah, one way.
So,
It's about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
4 lanes, it's probably about 75.
So, here's their traveling though. It took them 4 days to do that. It's nothing for us to do that in a little bit. Okay. So when you look at the land now, and when Moses was given that opportunity not to go into the land, but to go up there on Mount Nebo, and then he got to view the land from north to south and east to west. He got to view all of that land. That's only it wasn't quite 80 miles. It wouldn't have been an 80-mile look, but he got to see all of the land, what it looked like for that place. So, all right. Nazareth is about 80 miles due north of Jerusalem, in the province of Galilee, about halfway between the Mediterranean Sea and the Sea of Galilee. We've noticed that. Okay. We know almost nothing about Jesus's years in Nazareth. Okay. We can only assume that he was taught in the local synagogue, as most Jewish boys were taught. That's important to most. When in Acts chapter 4 and verse 12, they saw that they were ignorant and unlearned. These men were not. They were not uneducated. That's a double negative, right? So that means they were educated.
No.
They knew how to read, they knew how to write, they knew how to do arithmetic. They were businessmen, and they were successful businessmen. The point of the passage is they took knowledge of them that they had been with Jesus. But these men then were not. When Jesus was taught in the synagogue, he was taught how to read, write, and do all those type of things. Okay, they did not have a formal education, such as bringing up the feet of Gamaliel, that type of thing. They were taught that, and they were also taught a trade. Jesus was taught a trade by his father, his earthly father. That would have been carpentry. Okay? And that's what he's talking about in this passage, or in this section.
So you're saying that when they say these men are uneducated, they're just talking about they wasn't
They had no formal
formal
education.
education, not that they were illiterate.
No. All right. 1724 next week, right? Sorry, that's the end of class.
1724 next week.
Yep. 17. Today's 17th, right? 7/7. It's 24.
Oh.
Oh.
Get there.
That
He
one
can be
over my dad.
confused.
Yeah. Okay. What you
Okay.
say?
So that's our class for the September.